makes their own decisions and everybody makes their own choices, but they're not the only ones that suffer the consequences.
Welcome down the rabbit hole, friends. We're here today to go over and deep dive into chapter 7 of Jill's book. It's called Dying, Inside and Out. Jill writes, "All my life, I'd been taught that suffering was good. For anyone doing the Lord's work, pain was to be accepted, even embraced. Many are the afflictions of the righteous." I think to have that as a basis to your whole life mantra, to have that kind of as a mindset from a very early age has got to lead to problems as you go on in life. I think it can also, having a more balanced approach, because I do believe that religion can be a great aspect of a person's life, but taking a more balanced approach where God doesn't want us to suffer, and that if we are suffering, it's okay to put up some boundaries to try to make sure that our human experience is as positive as possible. But I do think we see this throughout the book, especially with Jim Bob, the idea that everything we're doing for God. We're doing through the ministry. So if we have to get up really early, if we have to take all the kids in a big van and they start running around and we can't find them and it's crazy and it's chaotic and it's bad for everyone and they miss homeschooling, it's all in the Lord. It's in the name of our ministry. So we're suffering for God, much like Jesus suffered. I think that also leads down the path of thinking that, spanking, corporal punishment, those kinds of things are appropriate because ultimately all pain, all suffering is done to enhance your own self-worth when it comes to getting into heaven in the afterlife. And if you're only living for that afterlife, then you begin to feel like maybe it doesn't matter so much what goes on here now in the human world. This is something that we see across many topics that we've covered on this channel, right? We can kind of see that with Ruby Franke, with Lori Vallow, that once you get into the mindset of what does it really matter what happens here because I'm living for the afterlife, it can become very dangerous to yourself and to people around you. Jill says that when things became hard or demanding, especially with filming, she would just tell herself, "Tough it out, Jill. This is what it means to serve God." During her second pregnancy, she told herself the same thing. She was pregnant with Samuel, and when things got painful or she was having a difficult time, she would say, "Tough it out, Jill. This is what it means to be a mama." She ended up laboring for about 36 hours at home and then finally went into the hospital. She had gotten so weak and unable to keep going that they needed to get her help. And once she arrived at the hospital, she continued to have a lot of issues until the doctor finally said, "Look, Jill, we need to go in and get the baby." She went in for a C-section, and you have to read the book to really get the best idea of how she portrays this, but she says that she was able to feel a lot of what was going on. It was extremely painful for her. She says she remembers even hearing her own screams. And then eventually she blacks out. When she comes to, of course, her rock, her person is there, Derek is there beside her, but baby Samuel is not with her. He was okay, but the hospital decided to air medevac him to another hospital that had a better type of NICU or a more comprehensive program to take care of babies who needed some extra help, even though he was doing fairly well. She does talk about how hard it was to be separated from him, and I think many of us know that feeling. I remember my son had to go to the NICU for just an hour, and I was just take me to the NICU. I don't want to be here on the bed by myself. I want to be with him. Eventually, Jill's reunited with Samuel. She's in the NICU with him. She's being cared for on the hospital wing, and her mom comes to the hospital. Michelle is there to help her. And once again, she says Michelle does an amazing job. And she's very grateful to have her at her side. He needed oxygen because he had been oxygen deprived and was almost non-responsive at birth. So it was very scary for all of them. They eventually found out that he had a brain bleed that looked like a potential stroke. And the doctors were telling her, we don't know what this is going to mean for him. Potentially, he could be developmentally delayed. He could have a lot of issues going forward, and it's going to take time before we really know where he's at. It's interesting that Jill tells us Jim Bob hadn't been invited to the hospital, but he just showed up as a visitor and kind of charmed his way onto the floor to see Derek and Jill. And Pop said a lot of people are asking about him, holding his phone so Derek could glance at it. And it was a text message from Chad and the network basically saying, "Get me a picture of that baby." Derek got really upset about this. He was like, "How dare you? Like, with everything we've been through, you're coming here to tell me you need pictures of the child? I can't even deal with it." So Derek actually texts Chad and says, "Please don't ask anyone else for pictures of my children. You're not getting any pictures." And Chad responds, "I haven't asked anyone for pictures. I don't know what you're talking about." Whereas Derek just saw the text to Jim Bob from him. And I think that's when they really knew they couldn't trust this person at all. Okay, so Derek and Jill, they are living in like a church rental duplex about 30 minutes away from the big house. So they're close to family, but they also have some space from them. It's not like something that Jim Bob owns. And she did feel like her siblings were often there to help, and this made a big difference in her life because she had had the C-section, and now she has 2 small children running around, so it did help a lot. Jill talks about how she really wanted to move on and let go of the past and things that had happened between her and her dad, but it was very difficult for her because every step they tried to make forward, it was like informed by, or there was some kind of connection to what had happened before with Jim Bob and TLC. Like, they cannot move forward with their missionary work. She says that she felt like she was in chains. And even whenever she experienced moments of joy, there were still also these feelings of guilt and shame because she had stepped outside the umbrella of authority, which she had learned about her whole entire childhood based upon the IBLP's teachings. And this was difficult for her. She never got to fully experience just being happy with what was going on around her. And this is where Jill really starts to question the idea that her parents have handed down to her from the IBLP, that you should have as many children as possible and that God should be in charge of your body and how many children you're able to have. Because after having the C-section, she realized it really wasn't safe for her to just get pregnant again. After Sam was born, she felt that there was just a very real chance that that would be her last child. And you can imagine what this would do to a person psychologically who was raised to believe that their worth really does have to do with how many children they had because their parents got a show based upon having so many children. Here, Jill tells a story about how she went to the hospital to visit a friend. She was sick, and it ended up kind of as a surprise that her dad was there also visiting this person. And she vocalized to her friend, "I don't know that I'll be able to have more children after what happened with Sam." Her dad was there and said, "Well, Jill, you never know. The Lord works in mysterious ways." I'm paraphrasing. He didn't exactly say that, but that's sort of what he said. And Jill writes, "I turned. He was looking right at me, smiling. He meant well, I guess, but in the moment I was mad. I wanted to ask him why he thought he had the right to comment about my uterus. But I bit the words back." That's so interesting. She says that it was triggering that he said this, and I'm kind of surprised that she's able to really even have that thought process at that point in time, because she was still very much feeling like she wanted to please her father. She goes on to say the thought that she may never be able to give birth again actually kind of traumatized her. And she started having a lot of fear about it. She thought to herself, "I've always imagined myself having a ton of kids. Do I really believe what I was taught now that I can't produce, 30 kids? Does this teaching even apply to me anymore?" So this was a huge step outside of her father's gated big house area. She's already physically moved out of the big house, but she's mentally still there. And she's finally stepping outside of the gates mentally and kind of looking around and being because of what's happened to me in my life, I can see that there are major issues with this philosophy and teaching. And in the book, there are just so many questions that Jill brings up that ran through her head. If you get the book, you can read through all of them. But she says things like, what if old friends start to think badly about me because I'm not having more kids? Am I a bad person? And then God thinks I can't handle enough kids. All these just like really sad questions that I think most of us who live outside of Christian fundamentalism don't really think to question ourselves about. So this was definitely like a period of time where she was having additional anxiety. And in this book, Jill does talk about how she and Derek go on to use contraception, which was a huge step away from the IVLP's teachings. And she felt like she was in a situation where she really had no choice but to use it, and that ultimately she was very grateful to have the choice to be able to use some kind of contraception. Meanwhile, there's just like all these emotions going on in her life, but she's living in Arkansas. She says that she basically liked it a lot more living down in El Salvador, where she could be more her true self. She could question things and talk to people around her. She felt more free to speak about her life and her true feelings. Now that she's back in Arkansas, she actually feels very closed down. Like once again, she has to be very careful about what she says to people. As she goes around the town, she'll have people stop her and say like, do you miss the show? I'm sure you've got a ton of babysitters with all those siblings, just things that like she may want to respond to. She may want to explain her situation, and she can't and she won't, based upon her own respect for the fact that TLC and her father have told her she can't speak about these things. Jill writes, remember, Pop's again whenever we were talking about the show, other people don't really understand and they might be jealous. Let's not talk about this with anybody else. Yeah, Jim Bob's like, people might start getting jealous of me. You might start getting jealous of me if you find out that I'm paying Josh, I'm not paying you, I'm paying this person. So don't talk about it. Shh, mum's the word. Okay, in the second part of this chapter, Jill's talking to us about how like her one escape was on Sunday when they had church and she would participate in like children's church. She just felt really at ease when they would go to the sermons. And she felt relaxed as she kind of like just settled into the crowd. She was just one of a lot of people there. And even though no church was perfect or is perfect, she saw a big contrast in the church they were attending versus when she went to like services with IBLP families. And she started seeing things like women were wearing pants at this church. She had a close friend who had a nose ring. And they were wonderful people. They were people who she thought were very righteous and wonderful and great Christians. And they were doing things that she was taught her whole life were so sinful to do. And so this led her to start questioning some of that too. Now, I think this part is hilarious. Jill has so much anxiety about starting to make some changes, like even to her wardrobe, that she has to go to Derek and ask him about it. And from everything I've heard about Jill and Derek, Jill is actually like the more outgoing one. Derek's very quiet and would kind of just let Jill do whatever she wants. And Jill's more of the person who's like, this is how we do it. But she actually goes to him and she says this, Derek, I said one afternoon when we gotten back from church and the boys were taking a nap, what do you think about pants? Can you imagine? And Derek says, huh? Wow. Okay. All right, so then Jill says, do you think that it makes guys think bad thoughts? Do you think that it makes guys think bad thoughts? Oh, poor Jilly Muffin. Derek says, I'm sorry, I don't mean to make light of it, but I do feel this sense of like, wow, you can see the juxtaposition in Jill's life versus my life. I think about this like kind of like my cousin must have grown up this way, and here I am over here. I just can't even believe it. I can't believe this. So Derek responds, what? And Jill says, women wearing pants. I was always taught that it was a sin. And Derek says, well, no, I don't think it is. Derek like had to kind of coach her. So it goes on. You can get the book and read about it, but basically it goes on with Derek having to pull up like Bible verses and stuff, and Jill has to say, but this Bible verse that my dad showed me says that you can't wear pants. And they talk about how that historically there were like reasons why this would happen. And it's just kind of like they're done with the conversation, and Jill's remembrance of this is that like Derek goes back to maybe like watching a football game or something, but she kind of sits there just like thinking about it, running it over in her head, like unsure how she feels. Oh my God, is it possible that we could wear pants? Oh, poor Jill. So it's like a huge thing for her. And she did say, instead of just getting Derek, she did want Derek to kind of tell her, yes, you should wear pants. No, you shouldn't. She even says, like, I kind of was like looking for him to say yes or no to me. And he doesn't. He kind of ends it with like, well, I guess if you feel this way, then you would do this. If you feel that way, then you would do that. That's very Derek. So she says, instead of getting Derek to just decide for me, I thought over a conversation and decided to pray and study the, and study the issue more for myself. I looked at the Bible to see what else it said about women in pants, and looked past the style choices of our pastor's wife and the worship leader and decided what I liked, admired, and respected about them. Okay, so then she says, the pants issues goes on for many pages. And I can't help but giggle a little bit about it, but it's actually like extremely serious. Like, I can't believe that this was such a major issue for her. I'm guessing it was for Ginger and some of the other women in that family as well. So she says one thing that kept troubling her about the pants issue is like she had decided that she felt it was okay to wear pants. Okay, well, that's one thing. But she did still feel like the Bible says you have to honor your parents, and her parents don't feel that it's okay to wear pants. So this was like another hurdle she had to step over. And she had seen that her sister Ginger had just started wearing pants, not on the show and not at the big house, but whenever she was back in Texas with her husband Jeremy. So she ended up calling Ginger and asking her about it. And Ginger talked for a little while about how she made her decision. And then says that I guess at the end of all this pants thing, she jumps directly from pants to tasting her first cup of wine. So Jim Bob was right. It was a road to like sinful, horrible things. Once she decided that she could wear pants, she jumped into having a cup of wine. And she said she only tasted a sip and didn't like it and put it down. And then finally in the fall, she decided she was going to wear pants out. And it was like her first time. And she came out of the bedroom, and showed Derek. And she said, "What do you think?" And he said, "It's fine." And she said, "No, I'm wearing pants, Derek." He paused and looked at me. "You look great. And it's practical too. You'll be fine." So they end up they're going to a famous amusement park in Arkansas. Silver Dollar City, and they go there a lot on the Duggar show. They talk about it constantly. So it's her first time wearing pants. She goes to Silver Dollar City, and she's so excited. She's happy to be there with her family, and she sees her mom and dad and the Duggar family. They have come on the same day, and they're all going around getting on the rides, and she's scared to have her dad see her, and she's like, I can't believe the first day I wore pants that this would happen. And so she kind of tries to stay away from her family, but they run into each other a couple of times. And she was grateful that there was no TV crew with them at this time, because she was worried that would be like a thing. And she did say that fans came up to her wanting to take pictures, and so she knew it was going to be on the internet that she wore pants, and so she was a little bit worried about that. And then I guess maybe like a couple weeks later or something, she goes to the big house to visit her family, and her dad wants to talk to her. And he says to her, which I actually think this is highly manipulative and sad. He says, number one, like he saw her at Silver Dollar City, and he wanted to know, were those pants that you were wearing? And she's like, yeah, they were. And he goes, your sister Ginger took the time to call us and go through the Bible like factually with us to tell us her reason in a rational way why she wanted to wear pants. And then I'm sure he just like stared at her like, are you kidding? That actually really bothers me. Like pitting siblings against siblings, it really bothers me. To basically be like, Ginger's the new favorite. Ginger and Jessa are better than you now. You used to be my favorite, but not anymore. Look at how Ginger did it. It was so much better. Because Ginger, I think, has taken like a more, because of the way her husband is, And because of the situation, I think of Jim Bob being a little bit more scared of Jeremy or being intimidated by him, Ginger's been able to do things in a different way. Whereas I feel like Jim Bob thought that Derek was going to be under his control forever. And so when Derek stepped out from under his control, he had a lot of anger towards him, and he's treated them accordingly. Anyway, the point being, like, he's kind of pitting sibling against sibling and using, like, these girls in a way to kind of to get an advantage over one or the other. And I think that's so unfortunate and wrong. It's one of the things that bothers me the most in the book. And so Jill says she didn't really say anything. She was just like, okay, thank you, like, talk to you later about it, and then never really brought it up again. And then she says one day she woke up and just decided she was going to get a nose ring. She went to a tattoo parlor and got a nose ring. And she said she did try to tell them about it, but they didn't answer the phone, and she was grateful for that. And one interesting thing is that after she had the piercing done and it was uneventful and she was happy about it, her dad left a series of voicemails. I guess she told her mom, and her dad left a series of voicemails saying, like, please take it out. You're ruining your body. Like, I'm so worried about you. Like, please remove this. It's a huge mistake. Another, like, weird situation. Like, your child has already completed this. Like, you're calling them and telling them that they've destroyed themselves. Okay, so now here comes the big letter that Jill writes to her parents that they're, like, so upset about, and they say it's, like, the most disrespectful thing they've ever heard in their lives. I'm only going to read a part of it because, I want to leave some things for people who want to read directly the book, but I'm going to read part of it to you, and the rest of the letter is, like, exactly the same. Okay, so it was actually a text, but it's, like, a long text. Jill writes, so I guess her dad's, like, calling her repeatedly about the nose ring, like, wanting to talk to her about it. And she said, honestly, I don't really feel like talking. When I feel like there might be a chance I'm just going to be verbally abused, manipulated, and emotionally hurt. It makes me want to shy away from any type of conversation. I don't want our relationship to be this way, Daddy. And I know we aren't always going to agree on everything, but we won't want to ask for counsel if we feel like we aren't going to be heard. And later she says, I love you, Daddy, and believe me, it hurts my heart to know that there would be any kind of disagreement. At the end, she says, we also recognize that differences can be hard for you too, Daddy. We want to be considerate of that too, and show that despite our differences, we still love and respect you. Love you, Daddy. This is the most disrespectful letter Michelle and Jim Bob have ever received from anyone. Wow. So there's a lot more to it. You can look it up, or, if you're able to get the book. I don't want to give it all away. But this is the letter that she wrote to them that they were like, this is so disrespectful. So she just says, like, she felt that she did her best to talk to them about it, and that she felt like maybe he would move his stance, maybe he would change a little bit. And she said, but none of that happened. She said that, quote unquote, Pops dug in. He hated her nose ring. He hated the way that she dressed. And he decided that Jill was a threat to the rest of his children and to his authority. And that's the end of chapter 7. The only other thing that Jill says is that she had increased anxiety and sadness, guilt and fear about everything that happened with this. She finally kind of said her piece, and her dad's response was like, you're a threat to the other kids in the family. What a terrible way to treat your child, a child that is doing so much for the world, I think. She's out there, like, trying to find her way. Her husband is willing to come out from under, like, the Duggar name and try to find something else that he can do to financially support his family. Whereas a lot of the other Duggar boys, they just work for their dad. And even some of the people who have married into the family, they're so dependent upon the Duggar name and so dependent upon Jim Bob. And Derek doesn't want to do that. Like, they're doing so much right in their lives, and they're being treated so horribly by Jim Bob Duggar. It's wrong. And I mean, this is just the start of it. We're going to hear a lot more in chapter 8. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope to see you tomorrow as we head down yet another rabbit hole.